power person dynamic is, I would offer literally, when you look at how stressed people are today, it is literally running the whole world. It is running most family systems. It is definitely running medical systems. It's running churches. It's running governments. It's running businesses, families, and it's time to take a step back and wake up from that dynamic running our lives. There are three things that happen in order to install a power person dynamic in someone's life, and that power person dynamic is usually an interaction, comes from an interaction between a parent and a child, though not always. It can be your big brother, your big sister, or even your little brother, your little sister. It can be, the neighbor. It can be any number of different people, but generally it is a parent. And the three things that occur to install that power person dynamic is, one, that the power person was not functioning as love, was literally not functioning as a human being, and therefore was not functioning in just and fair behavior. And there are really two different types of power person dynamics we're going to look at. One of them involves the messages you accepted from an individual that you perceived as an authority, or that someone had more control over your life than you did. So that's the second factor. One, they were not functioning as love, not behaving out of just and fair behavior. They had more power over your life than they did. And the third is that, and again, it's usually a child's mind, though not always. This can happen with adults as well, but the child perceives the event as survival. And the survival could be psychological, financial, emotional, not just physical survival. So that's a power person, and what we'll call an active power person dynamic. And then there is what we could call, and I'm actually still working this out to make sure it's accurate. So it's subject to update, subject to deeper insight. But the second dynamic that I'm incorporating, this is a new piece of the puzzle in terms of power persons and codependence, is what we'll call a passive power person dynamic. So it doesn't involve a message received from a person directly, such as we were just talking about with the parent type of thing, but it's a message that is activated from within, and oftentimes I think it is probably an inherited power person dynamic, but it's brought on not from a specific message from that person in authority, but a situation. And that situation resonates or activates a limiting conclusion and a behavior that's reached in one's own mind in response to that situation. An example might be, let's say an emergency occurs, and the internal response in that individual's mind might be due to inexperience, a lack of knowledge, unpreparedness, but that individual accepts an unreasonable internal conclusion about themselves, such as, I'm incompetent in emergencies. So that's going to kind of stand in the same place as an active power person dynamic, but it's passively on oneself. But when under stress, the behaviors and thought disorders involved in it are going to still take over and govern a person's mind. And the thing that determines whether or not, which type of behavior is going to be involved, because there are behaviors attached to that power person dynamic. And there are basically three behaviors. And the thing that determines which behavior is going to be keyed into the automatic decision system and force behavior. You know, oftentimes here you say to somebody, why did you do that? I don't know. I didn't want to do that. I tried to resist it. I tried to stop myself from. I couldn't help myself. Sometimes words I say, I couldn't help myself. And this is where a power person dynamic is activated by a level of stress. And remember that, and I think you can search the world over and you won't find this piece of information. You'll hear all kinds of people talking about stress and stress management and you know, stop and breathe or count to 10 and all that stuff. But how is stress created? You hear people talking about stressful situations all the time. There is no such thing as a stressful situation. Stress is created by the setting of a goal or the activation of a goal. And when I say activation, I mean there are literally stored within our structure millions of goals. Maybe uncountable numbers of goals that have been generationally implanted, and when they're activated, they take over and create stress. And because those goals don't come from an act of will, they tend to be out of harmony with current circumstances, and they tend to elicit behaviors, feelings, perceptions that are inappropriate to what's going on. Stress is created by the setting or the activation of a goal in the mind. Now, why that's important is once you understand that, and you understand the forgiveness process, the reality management process, you always have at your fingertips a way to reduce your stress. And what skips people from decent behavior to outrageous power person behavior is the level of stress that they're under. So again, when there's little or no stress, people will do whatever they did to get along with their power person. When stress starts to build, the automatic decision system will kick into a new level, and people will do what they did to resist and survive with their power person. When someone becomes ultra-stressed, then the automatic decision kicks in and forces them to do behaviors that their power person did to them that they hated the most. And my offering is that's what runs the world. And the importance of understanding the forgiveness process in there is that if you manage your mind, this, the mind goal management from the workshop, Getting the Stress You Need, is really important here. The forgiveness reality management worksheet. You notice the core of the forgiveness process is about canceling goals. What does canceling the goal do? It reduces your stress. When you reduce your stress by collapse the constructs of the mind, you give access to whole new parts of the mind, and you refrain from getting into that ultra-stress state where power person dynamics kick in, which are usually pretty crazy, ultra-stressed, invariably, across the board. Now, I can remember one workshop we did down in South Florida. It was a man that had been sober. He was an AA person. He'd been sober for about 30 years. He had a very large online AA community. And he invited us to come in and present. So I presented the codependence workshop. And afterward, he said, well, that's, Michael, this is just not correct. So what do you mean? It's absolutely right down the line. No. When I was a kid, my father abused me beyond all measure. I was beaten and hit every day of my childhood. And I have never hit my son. And I said, well, I congratulate you on the fact that you had enough willpower to refrain from being abusive with your son. But how much time do you spend trying to control your fists? And I could have bowled him over with a feather. because he never thought of the fact that he was constantly having to refrain from lashing out at people physically and hitting them, which is exactly what his power person did. It was exactly what his whole power person dynamic was about being hit. So yeah, he had the willpower not to hit, but it was still going on in his mind, even though he had the ability to refrain from acting on it. Now that's a nice level of willpower to have, or perhaps self-control. My offering would be a better option is you keep your stress at manageable levels, at lower levels, so you don't have to kick into that power person behavior to that level of energy. So if you're continuously managing your mind and managing your goals, then that level where you do what your power person did to you that you hated the most never comes up to the level where it can drive behavior. So once you step into dealing with power person dynamics, it can be very helpful to name who your power person is in any given situation. And when the stress is up and the chips are down, whose behavior do you replicate in response to that state of elevated stress? That's how you determine in any given situation who your power person is. For most people, they have many power persons, especially if they came up in a culture that was very controlling. And so you can have, let's say, around your financial life, mom might be your power person. Around your romantic relationships, dad might be your power person. When it comes to interacting with friends, big brother might be, or friends and family might be your power person. And so recognizing and beginning to deal with that power person dynamic is really a major key in cleaning out the unconscious dynamics in the mind. Now, remember that the human mind is designed to be fueled by love. When a situation occurs or a goal activates something other than love, some form of hostility or fear, then the automatic decision system kicks in, and perceptions, decisions, and behaviors are then run or fueled by the non-being mind. And they can only reflect some form of dissociated fear or hostility-based content that is stored in this carbon-based memory system. Remember, if you took your body to a chemist, a physicist, a lab, and said, break it down and tell me what it's made of, they'd tell you that the base element of your structure, or all of us, we are carbon-based beings. And you might remember that in the ancient teachings, they talked about this thing that went against us functioning as love, living in the mind that we're designed to live in, the mind of love, or in the ancient teachings, and there's nothing religious about this, was called the mind of Christ. You're designed, you and I don't care if you're the toughest guy in New York City on the corner block, your mind is designed to function best from love. I don't care if you're the middle of a criminal enterprise. Your mind is designed to function based in love. And if it's not fueled by love, then the option of selecting something different than what's already stored in carbon-based memory is eradicated. So there's this mind of Christ, and obviously if there was something that was going to go against that, it would be good to know where it was located. And you'll notice that we live in a culture that tells us that the Antichrist is somewhere out there. This dude with the red suit, the tail, and the pitchfork is out there to get us. But what is it that goes against you functioning out of the mind of love in you? Just watch where your stress levels go and watch how you're ripped out of the ability to function out of your choice to be loving in any given situation, to function as love. So if you look at a carbon atom and then you remember the number that was assigned to the mind that goes against you living as love was 666. And if you look at a normal carbon atom, yeah, they can alter it, and there are other atomic weights involved, but basically the basic carbon atom is 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons. And that's what, when the stress is up in the gypsy zone, that's what kicks carbon-based memory into generating perceptions through the automatic decision system, and then come up with all kinds of pseudo-solutions. I've often mentioned the number one pseudo-solution. That's the one I usually focus on, because virtually everybody in the world, I mean, I'll often say if I'm doing workshop, let's say there are 100 people in the room, and if I were to ask everybody their age, add up the numbers, and then take 5 years off of each of their ages, I could reliably predict that I now have the number of years that these people in this room have been trying to figure it out. The how, the why, the what of this, whatever this is happening. And my offering is, you will never figure it out. When you start realizing that our genetic history, our interactions with others with genetic histories, when you start looking at just in 4 generations, at least according to the ancient scriptural teachings, 4 generations are stored within your structure. That means that the thoughts, the feelings, the realities of 31 lives, when you include yourself in the 4 generations, are stored within your structure. That's carbon-based memory. So every trauma, every drama, every power person dynamic of the previous 4 generations of your bloodline is stored within you. And when you realize that, and then you're interacting with someone who has 4 generations in them, even if we just count the 4. But of course, where did the previous 4 generations get their dynamics, and the previous 4 and the previous 4? And when you just count back 30 generations, if you do the math, there are over 1.6 billion people in each of our genetic structures. So if I've got the energetic patterns of 1.6 billion people interacting with the energetic patterns of the 1.6 billion people in your bloodline, how are we going to figure that out? But here's the beauty. No matter what's going on, no matter how deeply traumatized one is, no matter how deep the dynamics are that are active, you can always, instead of trying to figure it out, forgive it. How, why, what is the booby prize ultimately? So if you get stuck in that, if I could just figure this out, you're stuck in your head. And what happens is people who get stuck in this dynamic give up their human lives to become a non-human thinking, cycling information in the mind as though that's ever going to happen, ever going to resolve anything. You'll recall, you'll have often heard me say that in order to heal, you've got to be out of your mind. So that's the number 1 solution. Number 2, winning, fight. If I could just beat them. I mean, take a look in politics today and watch this power person dynamic playing out in the political arena. From one side to the other, it bounces back and forth, the fight, the winning. I just want to beat them. And so when humans that are designed to function as love buy into that pseudo-solution, I got to win, then one gives up one's life to become a non-human attacking. Then, of course, there's the Greek solution of forgiving them or myself or the situation, whatever. Remember, never forgive anyone for anything. That whole story is a false Greek idea. If you choose to let someone off the hook, please pardon them. That's a nice thing to do, but that's not forgiving. So when you get into that game, then what happens is one gives up their human life love to become a non-human fixing, a non-human doing, a non-human pleasing. And they give up the active presence loving themselves for that pseudo-solution. The mind says, oh, look, here, we can do this by forgiving them. No, you can't. You can apply forgiveness to the dynamics inside yourself and remove the stress and remove the unconscious power person dynamic. But letting somebody else off the hook will not do that. The number 4 pseudo-solution, if I could just fix them or myself, which really comes down to, the thought that was brought up for the power person was, I'm not good enough, I'm broken, or they're broken. So if one gives into that pseudo-solution, I got to fix myself or forgive them, and you watch a person who do serial relationships one after another, where the project, as opposed to living as love in the relationship, the project becomes fixing the partner. So when you get into that fixing game, it's related to control. And to give that one up, one becomes a non-human pressuring. The next pseudo-solution is if I could just find someone to love, or someone that, and now you get a non-human faking, because you can't love anybody. Nobody has ever loved you. Nobody will ever love you. You've never loved anyone. You'll notice that what happens when people say they fall out of love, what happened? This person stopped doing things that I approved of. They violated goals I held for them and stopped doing what I approve of, or pardon me, what I was approving of them doing, and now I never want to see them again. Do you think that was a love relationship to begin with? No. It's a pseudo-solution. It's approval masquerading as love. And so that masquerade becomes a non-human faking. You should listen to our Healing Through Relationships workshop. There's a segment in there where I talk about how, this person, having bought the idea from their power person that they were broken, that there was something wrong with them, enters into a relationship with the thought, looking for, what does this person want me to be? I know I'm not worth anything, so what do I need to be? What do I need to do in order to have them love me, i.e. approve of me? And so now one tries to be something that they're not, and they become a non-human faking. Closely related to those last two is if I could just control everything and everyone. And then I could be safe. Then life would be okay. That's another one of the pseudo-solutions of the non-being mind. And so if one adapts that pseudo-solution, they become a non-human controlling. The next pseudo-solution is to strain and struggle to make up for a non-being life. You've got to get enough stuff to look good. People validate me, then I know, okay, that message that I was given by a power person is false and that I'm not broken. And for someone who engages in that one, then they become a non-human having and a non-human getting. Their lives are always about getting more stuff, because then that proves that they're not broken. So trying to make up for a non-being life, it's a difficult way to live. And again, it will never solve the problem. The next pseudo-solution, number 8, is if I just could put my pain deeply enough into my brain's image of them, whoever I'm blaming, If I could just convince them that they're the problem in my life, then everything would be okay. And to do that, again, one gives up one's human life, love, to become a non-human blaming. You know, we've talked oftentimes about how by the age of 4 in this culture, most people are card-carrying members of the one world universal religion of blame. It's all somebody else's fault. The next pseudo-solution, wrote the 9 of them now, is to take the easy way. Just stay on autopilot and do the behaviors of the past. Again, in order to engage in that pseudo-solution, one gives up their human life, their experience of themselves as love, to become a non-human suffering and a non-human victim. Number 10 pseudo-solution, it's just this addiction to being right. And when playing out of that, one never suspects self. It's always out there. And there comes the desire to prove that I'm not responsible for this. It's somebody else's fault. See, I'm right about it. Once again, to do this, one gives up their human lives, love, to become a non-human convincing. The next pseudo-solution, number 11, is to obfuscate, to distract, confuse, switch issues. A very popular, form of that, you see it very strongly in the political world today, is, well, you did it too. Well, look, this politician committed crimes. Well, so did that one. Yeah, well, if you're in a relationship where that's the game you play, it's time to stop and say, okay, so I got it. I did something, you did something, but right now, let's pick one and talk about that instead of playing this tit for tat, so we can actually have the hard conversation of cleaning up whatever the dynamic is. So if we're going to talk about when I did it, okay, so let's do that. Or we're going to talk about when you did it, let's do that. But let's not confuse them. If one buys into this pseudo-solution, this obfuscate, distract, confuse, switch issues, they end up giving up their human lives and become a non-human confusing. Like just kick up a whole stink, a whole mess, and then nobody will be able to figure out where the core of the issue is. Distraction. You see that, in a lot of the political stuff going on right now. A crime has clearly been committed, but we'll talk about 1,000 other things and get people so discombobulated and so confused that they won't be able to even think about what the crime was in the first place. So to give up this confusing, convincing, this victimhood, this blaming, this getting, this having, this stuff, this controlling. And then the final pseudo-solution we're going to talk about is to leave, to escape, to lie to yourself, to pretend, oh, I'm not angry, I'm not afraid, and or the alternative to leaving is to get rid of them. And once again, you're constantly on the go, moving from place to place, from relationship to relationship. So one who does that gives up their experience of themselves as love to become a non-human escaping, a non-human leaving. So these are the pseudo-solutions, and it can be really helpful if you were brought up in a codependent home to recognize what pseudo-solutions played out by your power person, because they'll tend to be the very ones that you'll play out yourself in your life. So identifying that can be a really key and important part of the healing process. And so that's another chunk of information about the power person dynamic. But when we look at I'll go on with just a few of the thoughts around this idea of the pseudo-solutions. When we look at these pseudo-solutions, behind it there's always a goal driving the mind. And the mind does not engage in any kind of behavior that is not related to a goal. And so the goal becomes the key way into accessing the hidden parts of the mind, uncovering, bringing to the presence of love the hidden parts of the mind, and by so doing, the dynamics, the untoward dynamics that have been absorbed from and or created in the presence of a power person dynamic begin to dissolve. And so to start to look in every situation at the goals involved becomes a major key to the healing process. So when I determine who the person is that I'm projecting this reality on, this pained construct of my mind, and I've looked at the dynamics that involve my power person dynamics, and specifically who my power person is in this given situation, then I'll probably have a better chance of being able to determine the exact goal and the motivation behind the goal that's driving my pain perception, and that's a critical component of the healing process. So when I think about this situation that I'm working on, this whole perceptual construct, this whole painful experience is a result of fear and or hostility resonated by this event or my goal for someone. What is it that I want this someone to do? So to clarify what your goal is, ask yourself the question, in this situation, if I were to state the ideal outcome, it would be, and to make sure that you state it in terms of what it is that you want. You know, let's say in a situation where your perception is you're being ignored, the goal wouldn't be, I want them to stop ignoring me, because energetically, that's an invitation for ignoring you to continue. You want to train your mind to move in the direction of what it is you want from the situation. So if I've got someone that's ignoring me, my goal would be that I want them to be there, fully paying attention to me. And then what's the motivation behind that? Well, that's so that, I can feel valuable. That might be the dynamic that's going on in the motivation behind it. Or another example, what would the ideal, always look at stating the ideal outcome, what you want from the situation. And sometimes that can be a real challenge to disconnect from all the times we said, well, I don't want that to happen, I don't want that to happen. No, we don't want that. I mean, you listen. I spend a lot of time when I'm out, when I'm in an airport or what have you, or in a store, and listening to conversations of parents that have with children. And I would say 90% of them are about, don't touch that, we don't want you to do that, don't do that, no, don't do that, and the whole focus on that, and that, and they wonder why the child does exactly that they're talking about, because that's what's getting all of the energy. So shifting the mind into recognizing what it is that I do want. So what would the ideal, the goal might be something, let's say it's in a relationship, I want that person to give up all of their autonomy and be subservient so that I can be in control. Now start doing some work around being controlled. That's sort of the solution of being in control. Do you feel like someone's not listening? Oh, if only they would listen so that I can feel heard. I just want them to cooperate so the job could get done. In each case, looking at what it is that you want. So when you identify that goal, then you can root out and identify the deeper dynamics that you need to be aware of. Well, yesterday we were looking at the pseudo-solutions of the non-being mind, the things that the mind tell us will solve our problems, but will do nothing but exacerbate our problems. So those, just to run through them quickly so they're fresh from yesterday's conversation. If you want to get into more detail about them, you can listen to yesterday's show. But the first of the dozen or so pseudo-solutions we're going to talk about is if I could just figure this out. How, why, what happened? Second pseudo-solution is fighting. Winning becomes most important. And one thinks if I could just beat them, then everything would be okay. Then, of course, if I could just let them or myself off the hook and call that forgiveness, which, of course, doing the pardoning game can be very satisfying in a relationship by letting someone else off the hook for what they've done. But if you're trying to let them off the hook for what's happening inside of you, you're not going to have much success. And then, of course, if I could just fix, which really means if I could control them, if I or they were just good enough, if I could find somebody to love me, and of course, in the culture, that really means approve of me, or someone to love that I could approve of. When we come into the world, we are the conscious, active presence of love, and the world specializes in knocking that out of us, and then telling us to go out and find somebody to love, or somebody to love us. If I could just control everything and everyone, then I'd be okay. Or then there's the pseudo-solution of struggling to make up for a non-being life. Then, of course, one can try to hide their pain deeply enough into their brain's image of others, that is, blame deeply enough. And, if I could just convince them that they're the problem in my life, they're the reason my mind, my physiology is producing this traumatic experience. That usually comes in the form of they made me angry, they made me sad. That's the starting point of it. And of course, if you're angry, you're sad. You're not angry, you're sad because of what somebody's done. You're angry or you're sad because there's sadness in you. And if you want to resolve it, you've got to go in and resolve it. So these are all pseudo-solutions. Then many people go to, well, if I could just take the easy way out, I'll just stay on autopilot and do the behaviors of the past, play out the games of the culture. If I could just be right, prove that I'm right, and never have to suspect myself, prove that I'm not responsible. And a big one is to obfuscate, to distract, to confuse, to switch issues, and of course, part of that game of obfuscate is, well, you did it too. Well, you know something? Maybe I did. But that's not what we're talking right now. We're talking about the fact that you did it. Or I did it. So let's stay with that. And yes, maybe there's a separate conversation for when, one or the other did the same thing. But let's resolve what's going on between us right now. And then the final pseudo-solution we talked about is if I could just get out of here, just the need to escape, leave, pretending that I'm not angry or afraid, get rid of them. And this escape game, this having to leave gets to be pretty old. And behind all of those pseudo-solutions, there's always a goal. In order for the mind to come up with a behavior, whatever it's based in, there's always a goal driving perception, and the specific identification of the goal that's driving pained perception is a critical component of healing. So the whole painful experience that the mind produces is a result of hostility or fear that's resonated by events in our world and in combination with the goals that we hold within our minds. And so, there's some basic things that people are after, and it can be helpful to realize some of those basics in determining what your goals are, because oftentimes goals are unconscious, they're automatic, and people they don't even know what's driving their own minds. So goals can range from, wanting to be cherished, wanting to be esteemed, to be safe, to be seen, to be heard, to be important, to win, to be honored, to have sex, to stay sane, to survive, to feel fulfilled. Things like having power drive a lot of people, be respected, the goal to belong, the need to belong or be accepted. Just the need to express can be a powerful one. To be approved of, to be acknowledged, appreciated, be in control. The goal for survival, to have food, to survive. To experience, and sadly it's usually experiencing approval, not actually love, but to experience what people call love, or to express love, to get cooperation, to have prosperity, to feel powerful, the goal to better oneself, and of course the myriad of things that can drive perception. And whenever I'm in pain, if I recognize that my goal is what's causing my mind to use pained content to build this particular perception, even though my mind is showing me a picture of you, if I'm in pain, my mind is projecting my own unconscious pain into my brain's image of you. And so as I become aware, then the core of the forgiveness process, once having identified the goal, is to cancel the goal, not because you don't want what you want, not because you can't have it, not because it wouldn't be wonderful to have it, but you recognize that when you load this goal in your mind uses your own pained content to build your reality and your experience. And so by canceling the goal, that reality, that experience collapses. And so when one cancels a goal, then the mind's conscious construct, which is usually informed by unconscious content, collapses, and one gets to drop into their unconscious content. And that's where the cleanup process begins. That's where the cleaning up of the mind begins. Now, oftentimes, if one is not having their goals achieved, anesthetics become the object of the search of one's life. I mean, to the point where people destroy themselves in search of an anesthetic. Listen to the numbers of people that are being destroyed by opiates, or I should say destroying themselves in the pursuit of opiates, something to anesthetize against their pain. And of course, the very basic definition of a codependent relationship is where I want to believe and I want somebody else to be responsible for my pain. So if I can't really prove or get somebody else to say, okay, it is my fault, I'm the one who caused it, then, and I'm not acquainted with the forgiveness process, I'm not aware of how to go inside myself and clean up this pain, then some sort of anesthetic is used to close off the thought disorders, to hide the seemingly unresolvable emotions and pain. Of course, the first step in that is denial. And in this work, our definition of denial is the act of thinking or speaking as though something outside of me is the cause of what's moving inside of me. And that's the beginning point of an ever deeply destructive cycle of false perception. Denial results in dissociation, hiding by the mind of the truth in order that I can believe my hallucinated lie, the construct of my mind. perception, by definition, is something that the mind generates in order to help us to believe that what's happening inside of us isn't ours. So the mind hides truth so that I can believe what my hallucination, my perception. The next step in that cycle is the projection of what I'm hidden from myself into my mind's image, which is really painted on the inside of my eyeballs of them, whoever the problem is. That cycle is completed when I then externalize my perceptual image. I really pretend that what I'm looking at, the body, quote unquote, that's causing me so much pain, the picture that I'm seeing in my mind, I'm pretending that it's actually out there. And when I do that, the misdirection that occurs, my mind generates that false perceptual constructs and hides the truth, and it seems like I'm protecting myself from my self-induced pain, but all I'm doing is projecting my pain. The pain's still there. The pain remains. The pain is still experienced, even though I put it into my brain's image of someone else. So this mechanism of protection is somewhat like an anesthetic, in that while not covering the pain altogether, it directs the mind to put one's pain into the brain's image of another in order to avoid facing the internally generated pain truly and directly. Game is absolutely everything. The denial cycle and anesthetics can appear to be pseudo-solutions in that they seem to solve our problems, but the pain's still felt. The truth is, if I'm in pain, my thinking is in error, and I have work to do. Now, when denial and anesthetics compromise intelligence and numb us to the warning signals that would inform us, they really complicate our challenges and actually end up intensifying the need for self-correction, of uncovering, engaging in truth. The mind energy behind our pseudo-solutions create aberrant psychological disturbances and physiological interference called chemistry in the cell. When that happens, we produce mental constructs and perceptions that block truth. Now, addiction becomes tempting when the internal, quote-unquote, chemistry of the current pseudo-solution isn't working effectively to shut down whatever I'm trying to avoid feeling. Anesthetics and addictions, the most common one being busyness, are often used to hide stress under the pretense that we're managing our stress. Ultimately, denial and addictions do nothing but create and reinforce living an unconscious life. If you take a look, you've been listening to the show for a while, perhaps I suggest you do, a worksheet a day or 5 worksheets a day or whatever. Did you do it? And if you didn't do it, what did you tell yourself? Oh, I was too busy. That's the most common one. And people can become addicted to, well, anything. In this work, we define addiction as the compulsive use of any anesthetic. Any person, place, circumstance, substance, situation, or activity to do 2 things: to avoid listening to one's highest guidance and or to keep from feeling and dealing with stress or with any mind energy they hold within them and emotions that do not come from love. So again, it's the compulsive use. It isn't that someone takes a drink, it's that one has to have a drink. And that's what turns something into an addiction. So these behaviors tend to dull awareness or shut down contact with thought disorders. It's a way to avoid one's own mind.
So here are some examples. Now, some of them may fall into the category of addiction and some not. So people do things like, or their avoidance goes like this. I don't need to feel my pain if I hang out with Bill because Bill keeps me laughing. Or when I have a rough day at work, the world fades away after just 6 drinks. Or I get so absorbed in the TV, I'm able to forget about my life. Something that, at least in my awareness, is relatively new. When I was a kid, I'd never heard of such a thing. But if I inflict enough pain on myself, I will not have to deal with this. We hear about young people cutting themselves. And it's a way of controlling what they don't know how to address in themselves, what seems to be an uncontrollable pain, with a pain that they can control. Or another one is, I avoid connection because it reminds me of my pain. So these are all things that one can become addicted to. So what we suggest is that you start looking at any particular tactic or behavior that you use, any pseudo-solution, when you're in fear or hostility. And so you might just want to think about what kinds of, have a pen handy, what kind of things do you do? And I've got a list here. I'm going to kind of run through this list. And, if there are things that you find yourself doing, you might just want to make a note and do some work around it, do some worksheets around it or what have you, whatever, use the tools. And or you might look at tactics that you observed your power person do, looking from that perspective of the codependence work. So, of course, the number one, the most common one, is the denial, the blame, dissociation, and projection. You made me mad, so it's your fault, blame. I hide the real cause of my pain. And then, by hiding the real cause of my pain, because energetically I've intensified my pain, now my intensified pain sends out a signal that draws somebody in to play that out with me. And when they play that out with me, they resonate what I've dissociated from, and what I've hidden from myself, I literally use to build my brain's image of them. It's called projection. Projection is not what our culture tends to define it as, is taking something that's inside of me and putting it outside of me. No. Projection is taking something that's inside of me and painting pictures on the inside of my eyeballs with it, pictures of somebody else that I'm blaming. And then those pictures are externalized. Pretend that what my brain is showing me that I think is coming in through my eyes is actually outside of me. So to dissociate and project is a big happening in our culture. Tactics. Disassociation, different than dissociate. Dissociate is to hide something inside of me that I don't want to look at or deal with. Disassociate is to just totally and completely disconnect from my own reality, from my own body, from life. So what are some of the other things people do? Yell, scream, use the voice, be cute, coy, use distractions, gaslight, lie, insincerity, deception, false religiosity, criticize either self or others, or both, degrade self, others, or both, covert, to convey a different message with my voice tone than with my words, leave, escape, run away, go numb, greed, become self-absorbed, false pride, turn to entertainment, insist on my need to be right, make excuses, many people avoid their emotions by staying in their heads, by intellectualizing. I'm willing to look within. Many will, in order not to deal with what's going on inside themselves, dish out a daily dose of disapproval to self or others, fall out of harmony with just and fair behavior by being unfair or unkind, envy, cheat, attack, destroy, attempt to get even, vengeance, steal, OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder. When you apply forgiveness, obsessive-compulsive disorders become obsessive-compulsive blessings. Defensiveness, have to take a position, puff self up, rage, threaten, pressure, intimidate, use sarcasm, become controlling. You ever played that game of controlling? By tantrums, going silent, withdrawal, run, hide, become abusive, either physically, emotionally, verbally, get boisterous, punish, harm others or self, or fantasizing punishment or harm can be another mechanism the mind will use. Become a pleaser. Engage in self-terrorizing thoughts, or terrorize. We're watching this big time in the political world right now, terrorizing others with thoughts, words, actions. Judge self, judge others. Make up stories, lies about others or self to block the truth. Apologize, become violent, either in thoughts, behavior, entertainment. Never own or admit the truth. Give in, give up, take the easy way. Play the game of never showing weakness. Be vulnerable. Rage, food's a big one, big avoidance. Sugar especially. Alcohol. Legal or illegal drugs, busyness again. Some people take up exercise as a way to avoid. You know, exercise is a wonderful thing, but if you're using it to avoid, it turns into something that can be destructive. Spending, shopping can be a big one for a lot of people. Of course, sex, promiscuity, pornography. Big avoidance mechanisms. Seduction. Reading could become an avoidance. Criminality, laziness. Playing games, TV. Social media. Violence. Again, anything can be used as an addiction. Frustration, gossip, complaining, become a workshop groupie. People have seen that over the years. They come to the workshops, but do they ever use the tools? I'll say, well, have you ever done the work of such and, oh yeah, I did that workshop. Have you did that? Yeah, I did. Oh yeah, I went to that one. Oh yeah, I know about that. I know about that. I know about that. It's like, did you ever do any of it? Pick up a worksheet and actually use it. You actually put the pen to the paper and use the tools. Diversion, distraction, escapism, leaving, running away are all the same game. Another way to avoid can be fear-based concern about others, children, self, parents, the world. Lack of trust, separate your life into pieces. You know, oh, I have friends in this arena, but I never introduce them to these friends over here. Avoidance, again, a form of denial or dissociation. We talked earlier about obfuscation, creating big, billowy excuses and distractions instead of actually dealing with an issue. So it creates confusion. Playing the victim can be a powerful way, becoming the drama queen or the drama king. Stories, distractions to create avoidance. Some people turn to fantasy. They make up facts to justify their conclusion. The mind presents a reality that is totally, completely illogical, and somebody will make up a story about, to make it reasonable. It's just like to make stuff up, just to make it believable to oneself or to others. So just to look at the tactics, if you've ever used them, to avoid dealing with the issues in your life, especially owning the power person behaviors, the power person dynamics that have been established. And that, again, is usually something from early childhood.